Welcome to Posh Solutions. Now we are going to see the guidance for practical risk assessment. How to complete the risk assessment project for Nebosh IG2. How to meet all the criteria to pass IG2 examination. Hope you will remember the 5-step risk assessment approach, which we covered in IG1, Element 3. Step 1. Identify the hazards. Step 2. Decide who might be harmed and how. Step 3. Evaluate the risks and existing precautions. Step 4. Record the findings. Step 5. Review and update risk assessment if necessary. Introduction. The aim of the risk assessment is to practically apply the knowledge and understanding that you have gained from your preparation. To do this practical assessment, you will need to complete a risk assessment, preferably in your workplace. Before you start the assessment, you must have completed your studies of the whole of the IG syllabus, elements 1 to 11, stages of the risk assessment. Part 1, description of the organization and methodology used. Part 2, risk assessment. Part 3, prioritize 3 actions with justification. Part 4, review, communicate, and check. Now let's see each part in details and what the examiner is expecting from you. How you can meet all the criteria to pass this practical assessment. Part 1, description of the organization and risk assessment, methodology used. Overall word count for this general description section is about 150 to 200 words. Description of the workplace. Give a clear and concise description of the chosen organization. In Part 1, background. You must first write the name of the organization where you are intended to carry out risk assessment. Then, you must write the location of the site where your site is located, for example, Sipcot, Guindy, Chennai, India. In the next row, you have to write the number of workers working in the site, including permanent and contract workers. Next, you must now provide the general description of the organization. This information should include products manufacturers. Clearly mention what kind of products do they manufacture. For example, manufacturing, automobile, spare parts. Services provided. What kind of services offered by the organization? For example, hotel. What all the services the hotel offers to the guests. You have to include the type of activities undertaken in the site at the time of risk assessment carried out. Then you have to give bit of information on the work shift patterns, work timings, week offs. Description of the workplace should have sufficient information so that the examiner will be able to get a clear understanding of your organizational activities, because the examiner may not be familiar with the industry what you have chosen. For example, if you say only garage-related activities, the information is insufficient for the examiner to understand what is exactly happening in the garage. Description of the workplace. Sample provided by Nebosh IG Limited is a medium-sized garage with offices, vehicle repair shop, and paint spray booth. The business does a lot of body repairs on vehicles involved in accidents. For insurance companies, servicing is also carried out for members of the public. Typical activities undertaken include moving spare parts from the stores to the workshop area, engine repairs, activities relating to servicing, MOS, body repair, draining fuel, oil from vehicles, spray booth activities, including the use of paints that are solvent-based. The garage operates from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. on weekdays and is closed at the weekends. Workers are only required to work 7 hours per day, so there are staggered start and finish times in place. Description of the area to be included. Here, you have to write the area which you are focusing to carry out the risk assessment. Any other relevant information. Here, you can write any other information which may be relevant to the risk assessment. For example, you can write the person responsible for health and safety management in the organization in section 2 of the description. You need to outline how you carried out risk assessment, in short the methodology you used to complete the risk assessment. When you carry out risk assessment, as an assessor, You intend to gather information. You talk to people, ask questions to get a clarity on the process or activity. You also gather information from observation during risk assessment process. And finally, you refer the legal documents to gather information regarding the risk and the suitable controls as suggested in the legal documents. What exactly you have to do in this section is to mention the sources of information you consulted. This includes: during walk-around, what hazards you observed, what legal documents you referred to identify the hazards, whom you consulted, the employee designation, and what question you asked to get more hazard information, then write the response received the employee. What of the internal documents you referred to identify the hazards, such as previous risk assessment document, accident record, complaints register, machinery maintenance records, ill health records, extras. Finally, what legal documents you referred to identify the control measures for the hazards that could be a risk to your organization. Here, in this section, the legal reference can be ILO, or UK law, or international standards, or any other legal documents. You can also write about any additional controls which can be introduced for any particular risks. Now, let's see the template. Unit IG2, Risk Assessment. Declaration. By submitting this assessment, Part 1 to 4, for marking, I declare that it is entirely my own work. I understand that falsely claiming that the work is my own is malpractice and can lead to Nebosh imposing severe penalties. See Nebosh malpractice policy for more details. Important note: you must refer to the document Unit IG2, Risk Assessment, Guidance and Information for Learners and Learning Partners while completing all parts of this assessment. Part 1, Background. You should aim to complete this section with 150 to 200 words. In this row, you have to fill the information which we have discussed earlier. When you write the name of the organization, if there are any confidentiality issues, you can give a false name or location, but other information provided must be factual. Second part of this section, you have to write the methodology used to complete the risk assessment, Part 2 of the risk assessment. Do this part carefully, because it is significant criteria which you have to meet. If any criteria is not met in this Part 2, will affect your result. Risk assessment. There are minimum 10 hazards, taken from at least 5 hazard categories. We will cover this in detail shortly. Examples of hazards: lighting, fire, forklift or overspeeding of vehicles, conveyor, drug abuse, dust, radiation, aggression and violence, stress, slip and fall, falling of objects, manual handling. These are few examples. You have to identify the hazards based on your workplace, but make sure they are from 5 different hazard categories. Remember, you have to write 10 different hazards from 5 hazard categories. In order to avoid confusion, you are requested to go through the Table 1, provided in the IG2 Practical Assessment Guidance document. The table will clearly explain the hazard categories which you need to include in the risk assessment. For example, noise, vibration, mental ill health, violence at work, substance abuse at work are hazard categories from Element 5. Similarly, there are many hazard categories are provided in other elements. The examiner is expecting you to identify 10 hazards from 5 hazard categories. In simple, you can choose 1 hazard category from each element, so you have covered 7 hazard categories. Remaining 3 hazards, you take of your choice. Note: do not take hazard category which is not there in the table. For example, excavation is not there in the Table 1. If you write excavation as hazard category, then you are not meeting the required criteria to be met for this part. In this section, we are going to have a look on how to do risk assessment and what the examiner expects from you. Part 2, Risk Assessment. Organization name. Write the organization name which you have chosen. This must reflect from your introduction. Date of assessment. Write the date risk assessment carried out. Generally, you have to write the date that should be, before your submission date. Scope of risk assessment. The area, where you focus, for carrying out the risk assessment. This is already given by you, in the introduction part. See the sample risk assessment, provided by Nebosh, for more information. Now, we will see each column, one by one. First one, hazard category, and hazard. In first column, you have to write one hazard category on each row from the table, which we discussed earlier. Below the hazard category, on each row, you have to write a hazard for the identified hazard category. In short, one hazard category, and one hazard in each row. For example, if you identify vibration as hazard category from element 5, then the hazard is whole body vibration, or hand-arm vibration. Column 2, who might be harmed, and how. In this column, you have to remember 3 things. 1. Who are the people who are going to get affected? 2. How the workers are going to get affected from the hazard. Clearly write what activity the workers are doing, how the hazard is going to cause harm for them. And finally, write the severity the workers or others may suffer. For example, earlier, we identified hazard category as vibration, and hazard is whole body vibration. In the second column, who might be harmed? Maybe the operator, helper, there are the people likely to be affected. Now we will see how they might be affected, and the severity. It can be like this: the operators are using jackhammers for demolishing the walls. They are using jackhammers without rest breaks. Continuous exposure to vibration causes whole body vibration, nervous damage, vibration, white fingers, muscle pain. Similarly, you have to write for all the 10 hazard categories. Next, column 3. What are you already doing? Here you have to write the existing control measures in place. Which means, what are the control measures that your organization has introduced already, which is currently in place to manage the risks? Try to write 3 to 4 existing control measures. Next, column 4. What further controls/actions are required? Here you have to write what additional controls are required to manage the risks effectively. Remember, these controls or actions must be realistic and based on the hierarchy of controls and the prevention and control measures in ILOOSH 2001, Section 3.10.1. In deciding on further controls. Column 5. Write realistic time scale for completion of each action mentioned in column 4. Column 6. Write the person responsible for completing each action. Important note: ensure all the columns are completed with realistic information. If you have nothing to write in existing control measures, then write not applicable. Never leave the column blank. If you leave blank, the criteria becomes not met. Now pause the video and read the sample document provided by Nebosh for getting more information. Part 3. Prioritize 3 actions with justification for the selection.
You are requested to go through IG1, Element 1. Reasons for managing health and safety at workplace.
In this section, first you have to write the moral, the legal, and the financial issues the organization may face if they do not follow health and safety at workplace. When you write legal arguments, you have to give references to ILO conventions, recommendations, or from ILO approved code of practice.
In this section, you have to prioritize your actions and justify your selection. Once you have completed the risk assessment table, you have to bring 3 high priority actions which you think it needs immediate attention. These actions may be taken from different hazard category, or it may be from same hazard category. Remember, you should not introduce or bring any new actions which is not there in the risk assessment table. Specific legal arguments. The word count for this section is 100 to 150 words. Here, you have write the specific legal arguments. The legal arguments must be based on the ILO conventions and recommendations or approved code of practice. You can include any specific country legislation, but this will not considered for marking, hence, you must only focus on the ILO conventions and recommendations. Mention the ILO convention or recommendations, number, article, or subsections. Do not copy-paste legal arguments from the open source. You have to understand what the law says and explain in your own words. Also, highlight what legal actions can be taken against the employer if they fail to fulfill legal requirements. The next section is consideration of likelihood and severity. The word count for this section is 75 to 150 words. First, you have to write the how likely the hazards could cause harm. This can be included as high, medium or low. You have to decide this based on the number of workers at risk, how often the activity is carried out, and the widespread of the risk, whether the same risk exists in other departments, branches or sites of the same organization. Next, you to write the severity that the hazards could cause, and include whether it is high, or medium or low. In the next section, you to write how effective each of your chosen actions is likely to be in controlling the risk. The word count for this section is 100 to 150 words. The intended impact of each action, which means the advantages of the action which could benefit the organization. Here, you also have to provide justification for the timescale which you have included in the risk assessment table. Then, you must include whether you think the action will fully control the risk. Give a justification for this question. Part 4. Review, communicate, and check. The word count for this section is 10 to 50 words. The first part of this section is to provide a review date for your risk assessment. Justify why you have chosen the date for review. The review date must be realistic. Do not write only month and year. You have to specifically mention the exact date when you intend to carry out the review of your risk assessment. In the next section, we are going to discuss about communication. The word count for this section is 100 to 150 words. You must indicate how you are going to communicate the risk assessment findings. For this, you need to think on the various communication methods which may be adopted to communicate your findings. For example, notice board, toolbox talks, committee meetings, email and similar things. Refer IG1, Element 3, Various Communication Methods. Next section is follow-up. In this section, you have to include what are the strategies you are going to adopt to follow up the status of each high-priority action from Part 3, whether the actions have been implemented, what is the current status of the actions. For example, you can set some reminders on digital gadgets, or through follow-up emails, or having meeting with concerned person. If any action is still not initiated, or unable to complete on time, then what is going to be your next action? With whom you are going to discuss about this matter? For example, discuss with senior managers or finance director for more support to quickly implement the action on time. The example document might have provided you clear idea. The assessment must be your own work. Any false claiming could lead to malpractice. For more details, refer Nebosh Malpractice Policy from the handbook. The submission can be done either in Word format, which is an electronic template, or you can use handwritten format. The templates and the submission date will be notified to you via email. Thank you for watching this video. If you have any doubts regarding IG2, feel free to contact us.